Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX14 Walsh, welcoming you to an all new Ace in the Day gameplay for the arcade mode of War Thunder. In today's episode I shall be reviewing the N1K1 Kyofu, a Japanese floatplane fighter going to tier of 2 and a battle rating of 2.7. For the purposes of today's historical overview, I'll be covering the N1K from its historical inception through to the N1K1 Kyofu variant in its operational service. With that, let's begin. In 1940, the Imperial Japanese Navy anticipated that a war in the Pacific would stretch the reach of their aircraft carriers to an extreme. As a result, it was decided that floatplane fighters optimised to operate from forward positions would fill this potential deficit, particularly with regards to supporting amphibious operations. A formal requirement for a floatplane fighter was subsequently published, with both Nakajima and Kawanishi asked to put forward designs. Nakajima proposed a floatplane conversion of the Mitsubishi A6M2 Raisin naval fighter. This essentially entering service as the A6M2N as an interim solution, and if you'd like to know more about the history behind the A6M2N, you can do so using the link in the top right corner of your screen as displayed now, which will take you to my review of the plane. Kawanishi, on the other hand, was tasked with designing a purpose-built aircraft as of September 1940, which would replace the A6M2N and fully fulfill the requirement. Kawanishi's proposed design was the N1K, a compact monoplane with a single large float under the central fuselage and smaller auxiliary floats under each wing. The auxiliary floats were originally retractable, yet it was soon found that they would make the aircraft overly heavy and complex, meaning they were switched back to fixed floats. In terms of power plant, the N1K inherited the Mitsubishi Mk4D Kasei 14 1,460 horsepower radial engine from Kawanishi's existing reconnaissance floatplane design, the N1K1 Kyofu. This engine was to drive a pair of contra-rotating two-blade propellers. With regards to armament, the same armament would be used as in the A6M2 Raisin. Two 7.7mm Type 97 machine guns in the nose and two 20mm Type 99 Model 1 cannon as mounted in the wings. With the prototype flying for the first time on the 6th of May 1942, it was soon found that the contra-rotating propellers led to numerous reliability issues, encouraging the need to fit the Mitsubishi Mk4C Kasei 13 1,460 horsepower radial engine instead, driving a 3-blade propeller. Even with the switch of engine, the high power output of the engine made the plane difficult to control in water, but once it was airborne, it was considered to be a phenomenal aircraft, especially with regards to its manoeuvrability. Based on the eventual success of the test flight program, the N1K entered production by the end of 1942 and started being rolled out into service under the designation of N1K1 Kyofu, or Mighty Wind in English, Model 11, as of July 1943. Unfortunately, by this time, the IJM was on the defensive, negating the need for the floatplane fighter altogether. Even with an uprated Mitsubishi Mk4E Kasei 15 1,530 horsepower radial engine being fitted to late production series aircraft, the N1K1 proved to be outmatched by the contemporary Allied fighters it faced, meaning that production of the aircraft stopped in March of 1944, with only 97 planes being built. On the plus side, when the N1K1 saw combat service in Borneo as an interceptor, its excellent performance was recognised, leading to a land-based version being requested by the IJM. This would be known as the N1KJ Shiden, which we'll cover in future reviews. But until then, let's get into seeing how the N1K1 Kyofu handles in the skies of War Thunder's arcade mode. Today's gameplay is brought to you from the airfield domination map Kaminsk. For this we'll be using the following setup. Stealth belts are our 7.7mm machine guns, the reason being in my experience I found the stealth belts to be the most powerful out of those on offer. As for our cannon, we're taking the tracer belts, which are rather consistent in their damage output over time, thanks to the sole constituent round being high explosive fragmentation tracer, which has the added benefit of the tracer giving us a visible marker to see where our rounds are going, and if we happen to miss particularly in a turnfight, we can quickly correct for our actions. Our gun convergence is set to 400 meters, the reasoning being twofold. Firstly, in the turnfight, due to the slower nature of this plane compared to its battle-rating adversaries, we'll find that our foes will try to pull distance in the turnfight, getting to distances of 400 to 500 metres, and the 400 metre gun convergence will work well in this regard. On top of that, we also have some light touch boom and zoom characteristics, as I'll go on to explain, and a 400 metre gun convergence will work well in this regard as well. As for our fuel load, we're taking the standard 30-minute fuel load to ensure we can make it to the end of the game, unscaled on fuel capacity. We'll begin our analysis then by noting that the climb rate of the N1K1 for its battle rating is rather strong, being able to match the vast majority of its opposition, such as the P400, the P40 Kitty Hawks, the A36, the Messerschmitt 19 ML3, all these planes, but with one caveat, and that is, do not take this plane above 3,000 meters altitude, at which point the climb rate itself does not drop off, but the sustainability of the climb rate of this aircraft drops off by a considerable margin, meaning that you can no longer use a climb angle of 25 degrees and balance the speed of this plane out on more emergency power, compared to its main competitor, the A6M2N, which can do this all the way up to 4,500 meters altitude, for example. So instead you have to start going through a series of climbing sprints, gaining at roughly 800 meters altitude each time before you need to level out and build up your speed again. Whereas planes such as the A6M2N, or more noticeably, planes such as the Messerschmitt 19s that you're going to be seeing can do this much more easily, sustain their climb and get to 5,000 meters altitude plus and hide above you. So instead what you need to do is try and optimise your dogfights for below 3,000 meters altitude, and that will be the upper point of the ideal altitude range I'm going to recommend. And in turn, once you start luring your opponents into a 1 versus 1, such as against this A36 here, you can really start to take the upper hand. And we can see this through the manoeuvrability of the plane, where from the outset you have a very strong roll rate. Not the best at the batter rating in terms of what you'll be seeing. There are planes such as the I-16s which have the superior roll rate, but a very strong roll rate nonetheless, meaning that you can snap roll well and change the directionality of this aircraft on the fly, coming in handy in sets of rolling scissors or when you need to do a barrel roll. Add to that your very strong rudder, which is the joint strongest at your batter rating, alongside the A6M2N, where you've got a very tight flat rudder turn circle and you can do hammerheads or quick snaps on the rudder with relative ease. That means you're going to be a plane that can balance itself out on its rudder and, compared to most, be much more agile in this regard. And as we come around here by the split test against the P400, hopefully you're starting to see the weakest control surface in effect, and that is the elevator. Now the issue with the elevator is not the control surface itself once it's active. The elevator is reasonable once it's active, it's getting the initial response out of it, and that is because of the heaviness of this plane thanks to the central fuselage float. And that the initial response to the elevator takes time, and this costs you time in the midst of a dogfight, alternatively in a set of vertical manoeuvres such as your standard vertical loop. And below 450 km an hour, this means that your looping circle is actually one of the widest at your batter rating for a fighter. Whereas in the case of the A6M2N, which doesn't suffer from this despite being a floatplane fighter, that's got a much tighter loop circle, and that means you're going to be falling well behind other competitors such as the P36G Hawk. Now outside of this, what you have to consider as well is this also has an impact on your ability to conduct turns as quickly as you would like. And what with your turn circle being slightly off of the A6M2N, but being in the range of the I-16s you'll see and the Spitfire Mark IIA, and that means you've got one of the better turn circles at your batter rating. But here we're not using our turn circle, instead we're using the manoeuvrability of our plane in the vertical based on the elevator and the rudder in order to stall out our foes, the second one here being the Heinkel 100D1 and picking up a triplet of kills, the final being the C202 here, and we're going to be using our rudder in a hammerhead fashion in order to rip them apart, coming down on them hard, and we'll see the potency of the rudder in this regard. As we dive down on our foes, let's talk about high speed control. In regards to the control surfaces of this plane, what's rather unique is the fact that this plane will catch a lot of players out. Now in the outset, this is a slow aircraft. We can see that by the fact that it doesn't travel the quickest. Straight line acceleration wise, you will be able to build up speed in a rather nice fashion, going from your stall speed of 135 km an hour, which is relatively high for your batter rating, to 380 km an hour at a decent rate, or 440 km an hour with more emergency power. But once you get to these points, your acceleration drops off massively, and in turn other planes at higher altitudes, particularly above 3,000 meters altitude, can build up a lot more speed over time and continue to get away from you. However, when you go into a dive, your initial dive speed acceleration is actually rather good, being able to match a good number of planes, including the best divers that you'll see around your batter rating, such as the A36, the P39 Aerocobras and the P47s. In that, you'll accelerate very quickly up to 600 km an hour, but as soon as you get to that point, that's where your dive speed acceleration drops off massively. And in order to get to your maximum dive speed of 780 km an hour, it's going to take you an age to get there, and it's not worth trying to get there if you're willing to sacrifice all your altitude or not. Now here what you're seeing is me almost being caught off by the lack of sustainability in the climb rate of this plane, whereby the Messerschmitt 1 and ML1 with the superior climb rate sustainability on their Daimler-Benz engine almost caught us out in being able to point their nose up towards us and essentially just keep shooting at us whilst forcing their plane to stall out. Fortunately, we called the energy situation just right in the fact that whilst they were flying towards us opening fire, they no longer had the energy to repoint the nose of their aircraft, allowing us to fling our plane across their line of fire and dodge the majority of their fire. but it could have been a lot different if they had been hitting us with higher caliber weaponry. And that is because the durability of this plane is not too good. It's able to absorb a light caliber machine gun fire very well, but above that, all other weaponry is going to quickly rip this plane to pieces, and if it catches fire, well, that's going to be the curtain call. And with the C202EC coming towards us with two 20mm cannon, we don't want to get hit, as we now follow them into a turnfight. And what we'll see here is the C202EC tries to use a vertical spiral or climbing spiral to force us to stall out in their wake. But the hidden advantage of this plane is you've got a very powerful Mitsubishi engine, which means that climbing spirals do not work very well unless your opponent's got a huge amount of energy over you in the first instance. And we see that there as we bring the C202EC down for our 7th kill. Now coming back to high speed control. In terms of your roll rate, you will lose 50% of your roll rate between 600 and 700 km an hour, which isn't too much of a penalty because by the time you get to 600 km an hour, your dive speed acceleration will already start to drop off. As for your rudder, you'll find between 450 and 650 km an hour, you will lose 75% of your rudder's responsiveness, which isn't too much of a penalty as such if you get used to accommodating for it, and really you only want to get to 600 km an hour anyway for the same reasons as mentioned previously. And as for your elevator, between 600 and 650 km an hour, you will lose 25% of your elevator responsiveness, which again is not something to worry about, because as we're now about to see, the boom and zoom nature of this plane in terms of its light touch lends towards the idea that you want to conduct very light boom and zoom attacks on foes, dropping no more than say 1,000 meters altitude, swinging down on the foe, building up your speed to just shy or just above 600 km an hour, hitting the target and then breaking away. And this is going to work well with the fact that you actually have decent short-term vertical energy retention in this plane, and the power of the engine also adds to this. And we're now going to see that against an F4F Wildcat, who initially starts to climb up towards us, realises they haven't got the energy to do so as we start to come down on top of them, and we're going to pursue them in a boom and zoom dive, and use our decent high-speed controls in order to follow them. But keeping in mind the fact that as we go to higher and higher speeds in the dive, now heading towards the 600 km an hour mark, we're not going to be building up any more speed. But again, having cut the dive now at 630 km an hour effectively, we're able to get onto the target, rip them apart and then surge back up. Unfortunately, we've got an A36 in our 6 who's coming with a lot of speed, and that's where the lack of straight line energy retention of this plane is going to hurt it somewhat, and the fact that you're only able to start really retaining your speed at 490 km an hour. So we know we can't get away from this aggressor, instead we're going to have to force a turnfight, and here we'll use our roll rate to initiate a barrel roll, force them to overshoot and gain the upper hand very quickly. Now fortunately for us, the one key advantage in any retention we have is that you've got very strong horizontal energy retention in this plane. As long as you keep things directly in the horizontal, you maintain your energy very well, and having done some damage to the A36, we're breaking away, making sure we're not lured into the furball, which is what they were trying to do, using their speed advantage to make us follow them and frustrate us as a result. And now we have a Messerschmitt 19M coming in towards us, and here we'll go for the turnfight once again, trying to cut underneath their incoming fight and then breaking up and over. The ML3 missing their initial shots, and we start to gain the upper hand. Unfortunately, the game's going to end before we're able to get the killing shot on target. With that, let's go take a look at the post-game stats. With our 8 kills, we're able to pick up 16,050 silver lions and 2,088 research points. To defeat the N1K1 in a given matchup, I can recommend one main approach, and that is high-speed boom and zoom passes, where you'll be looking to exploit the poor climb rate sustainability of this aircraft above 3,000 meters altitude from the outset of the match to get above it and then start conducting your raids from above. Now, not only one clean pass on the target is going to be needed, or the lackluster durability of the N1K1. But in return, what has to be considered is that there's no other maximum altitude limit for you to exploit in this plane, what with its control surfaces starting to become heavy in regards to the elevator only at 4,750 meters altitude, this being additional heaviness to what's already there, and in terms of the engine performance, what with it dropping off at 5,750 meters altitude in terms of acceleration. These altitude ranges being approximately the same for a large number of aircraft at the battle rating where they start to feel a penalty of their own. If you do happen to find the N1K1 is on your 6 and at close range, dive and build up as much speed as quickly as possible, as if you're able to get to in excess of 600 km an hour, that's where the dive speed acceleration of the N1K1 is going to be severely crippled, and therefore you can start to get away. But ideally you always want to avoid turn fighting with this plane unless you're flying the likes of the A6M2N, which will be its equal if not its superior slightly, and therefore be able to gain the upper hand over time. Therefore, in flying our N1K1 today, hopefully we demonstrate the potency of this aircraft as a turn fighter and the fact that it's able to counter tactics such as climbing spirals, which can be used to counter dedicated turn fighters, what the combination of its great horizontal energy retention, moderate vertical energy retention, and its very powerful engine, giving it the ability to follow foes despite its relatively high stall speed of 135 km an hour for a significant period of time in the spiral. But this is not the dedicated turn fighter that we saw with the A6M2M, where you have a little bit more versatility offered to you, while the more considerate high-speed control in the midst of a dive offered to the roll rate of this plane. And instead what this means is, with the ideal altitude range bottom limit being 1,000 metres in my experience, so ending up with a range of 1,000 to 3,000 metres altitude, you can use this degree of altitude in order to dive down on those below you and conduct very simple short distance boom and zoom passes, putting your firepower to good effect. And the firepower may be practically cloned from the A6M2N, but do keep in mind you have an extra 40 cannon rounds per gun, and this can make the difference in those long duration engagements where you've got multiple foes to cut through. So if anything, if you're looking for the improved, more versatile aircraft, I would recommend going for the N1K1, whereas if you're looking for the dedicated turn fighter, go for the A6M2M. But with either plane, they're both as deadly as one another, and what you'll find in the N1K1 is, once you get onto a foe 6, in flying the Rex, you can be absolutely ruthless. And so I've been TX141, and if you have enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future War Thunder videos on my channel. But until next time, as always ladies and gentlemen, take care and good luck in the skies.